It's been 30 years since China has tied up with ASEAN, the 10-member Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and the relationship is growing closer. What will the future bring for the region?
From CGTN headquarters in Beijing, this is The Hub with Wang Guan.
Hello there, and a very warm welcome to The Hub. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing. Terminology matters, and arguably it matters even more in international politics. This week, China and the ASEAN are elevating their relationship to quote-unquote comprehensive strategic partnership, one of the highest levels of relationship among governments. What does this actually mean?
As an ancient Chinese statesman observed, desires for justice prevail and acts for people's benefit succeed. Let us keep close to our hearts people's aspiration for a better life, and put on our shoulders the mission of our times to safeguard peace and promote development. Let us work hand in hand to build on what's been achieved, and work toward a closer China-ASEAN community with a shared future, and make our region and the world even more prosperous and beautiful.
For more on the China-ASEAN ties, we're very pleased to be joined by Assistant Governor of the National Bank of Cambodia, Serey Shea, in Phnom Penh, and also later on we'll be joined in Kuala Lumpur by senior political analyst Dr. Azmi Hassan. Here in Beijing studio, we have Dr. Gao Zhikai, Vice President at the Center for China and Globalization. Welcome, Victor, Dr. Hassan. And Governor Shea, if I may, let me start with you. Overall, let me start with you, Governor Shea. Prime Minister Hun Sen of Cambodia recently said and described the China-Cambodia relations as strong as steel, echoing a similar term used by the Chinese president. How would you describe the current state of Cambodia's economic and financial relations with China?
Well, first of all, thank you, Guan, for having me on your show. Before I touch on the relationship, let me give a bit of background of Cambodia and where we're coming from. And I know a lot of the Chinese public may have heard about Cambodia, temples and beaches, but not much about our history and our economic development. Cambodia has been through nearly 30 years of civil war. We've had our basic infrastructure destroyed to the ground. We even have our monetary system abolished, where people were reduced to use barter. And so when we achieved partial peace in 1992 and full peace in 1998, that's only when the country really started to develop. And since then, for the last 10 years, we saw growth at about 7% on average, making us one of the fastest growing economy in Cambodia. But of course, COVID has impacted everyone, and our economy has contracted to -3.2%, and we're looking forward to a positive recovery in the next year. But back to your questions on the relationship. The Cambodia-China relationship went back to long time ago. Actually, if you have been to one of our temples, or actually many temples, you will see depictions of trade between the Khmer people and the Chinese people back then. And in fact, one of the famous explorers from China, Gao Zhikai, made his journal, was one of the most important witnessing of the life in the kingdom back in the 12th century. And as you also mentioned out, the relationship between our kings, late King Sihanouk and late Premier Chu Enlai in the 60s has also strengthened that relationship. And you're rightly pointing out about the term strong as steel Cambodia-China relationship. We've had bilateral trade with China. In 2020, just to give you some number, we trade between the two countries reached about 8.2 billion US dollar, and we expect it to expand to 10 billion in 2023. In terms of investment, we've had about 2.7 billion US dollar from China in 1929. We've also had a lot of developmental assistance from the government of China, particularly in building infrastructure and in the sector of energy and mining. But You know, we've had this China-Cambodia free trade agreement. Hopefully it will be going into full force in 2022, and we look forward to see more relationship between the two countries.
Right, Governor Chia, I'm sure you've heard this as much as I do. Many Western commentators say that Cambodia is, quote unquote, too reliant on China economically, pointing out that China holds nearly half of Cambodia's national debt, as well as the ever-increasing Chinese investment in your country. What will be your response?
Look, as an economist and a trained accountant, I will speak from the number that I have in front of me and not on perception. If you look at the government public debt, Cambodia government public debt, it stands at about 32% of our GDP, and that is well below the threshold set by the IMF. And of course, of the 32%, 45% of the debt is owed to China. But this is a small percentage. Second of all, if you look at investment in China investment in ASEAN, which stand at $14.3 billion in 2020, Cambodia received $1.2 billion. That is less than 8% of the total investment. So to term us as too reliant, I think it's a bit exaggerated. But let's be fair, that Cambodia is a country that has been ravaged by war. The government role is to develop the country, to create jobs for our people, to reduce poverty, and therefore we welcome investment from any country, from any development partner. And we did receive investment from other countries as well. I mean, in the 90s and the year 2000, we received a lot of assistance from our development partners, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, but we also received assistance from the United Kingdom, from the United States, from Malaysia, and other South Korea and Japan. But in the last 10 years, we've seen, you know, China investment and developmental assistance taking over those countries. But it's not over to reliant at the moment. And again, as our Prime Minister mentioned, we still welcome whoever want to come to Cambodia. The country is opened.
Fair enough. Also, this week, China and ASEAN elevated their relationship to comprehensive strategic partnership, one of the highest designation of relations cooperation among governments. How do you see that new designation impacting lives and economies in ASEAN and in your country, Cambodia in particular?
Well, I think that on the top of the existing initiative like the RCEP, the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement with China, we also have the Lanchan Mekong initiative for Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, and Vietnam initiative with China, where it helps these CLMV countries, we term it, to reduce developmental gap with our neighboring countries. I'm sure that this new strategic comprehensive partnership will deepen the relationship, and especially from the speech of President Xi, there was a clear sort of goal, and it's very promising. He mentions about $1.5 billion in assistance to ASEAN for the next 3 years to recover from COVID. He also mentioned to increase import from ASEAN country worth $150 billion and particularly on agri-products. Now, I want to focus on these agri-products. Cambodia exports about we export to China about 1.2 billion, mostly in agricultural product, but we import about $7 billion from China. So there are room for improvement in terms of mutual trade. But I think in terms of agri-product, and if that is what President Xi mentions, increasing import from ASEAN, focusing on agri-product, I think this is where the opportunity lies for Cambodia, because we have 60% of our people in the farming sector. Cambodia have still a lot of land that has been not yet exploited, and therefore we believe that we can fill that gap with agri-products. And I do believe that China is also looking for reliable suppliers of food, because I mean, I'm somebody who loves food. And so I want to make sure that, the house is always supplied with food for the children. And this is very important. I believe in these centuries, we can talk about, a lot of things, but if you don't have food on the table, then there's not much to talk about. So in this regard, I think we can strengthen our relationship.
Indeed, agricultural cooperation can be crucial. Also, we know that Cambodia, joined the Belt and Road Initiative since its inception. What do you make of this initiative, the Belt and Road Initiative?
No, I can't talk about other countries, but I can speak for Cambodia that we have a lot benefited from the Belt and Road Initiative, particularly a lot of infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, the country was ravaged by war. A lot of our basic infrastructure was destroyed. And so with this Belt and Road Initiative, we were able to rebuild roads and bridges. And recently, through the BRI, we are able to we are going to have our first highway from Phnom Penh to Sihanoukville. That is to the great benefit for Cambodia, because Sihanoukville is a port city, and we need that connectivity to improve our logistic costs and of course, trade. So definitely this is something that we have also benefited a lot.
We know Cambodia is stepping up its digital growth. It has recently launched a digital currency called Bakon. How has this new digital payment system changed the local currency use and local economy?
Well, Cambodia is a very dollarized economy, and we're still very much reliant on dollars in our economy. 90% of the transactions are done in US dollar. But as a central bank, as an institution that conducts monetary policy, and if you understand it by the word, is that we control, we manage the supply of money. And when we don't have control over the supply or the demand of money, then our monetary policy becomes less effective. And so this is why through this digital currency, it's not a central bank digital currency per se, but it has some feature of it. But through making digital payment more convenient, we hope that people will adopt the usage of local currency even more. And in fact, this is just one of the initiatives to improve the use of local currency. There are many more. We've been working with the PBOC from Wuxi, Guangxi, to have Cambodian local currency listed and allow people to buy directly from the RMB to local currency. We also try to work with a couple of Chinese banks here, namely ICBC and Bank of China, to encourage cross-border trade settlement in local currency, where Cambodia exporter can pay to the Chinese importer in RMB, but in return, the Chinese exporter can pay to Cambodian importer in local currency, Khmer real. So that's how we see we can improve the use of local currency, not by doing things alone, but also have partnerships and support from our partners.
That sounds exciting. And finally, Governor Chia, I know that you're studying Chinese. Actually, you've been studying Chinese for a while. How do you feel personally about increasing people-to-people relations and people-to-people understanding between China and Cambodia?
I think I'm actually learning Chinese for quite a while. So now I do 3 hours a week, and I hope that next time we meet I can talk to you in Chinese. But I think person-to-person relationship is very important, and you rightly pointed out, and I also pointed out about the relationship between our late King Sihanouk and Premier Chu Enlai. That started with a personal relationship, and our Prime Minister Hun Sen and President Xi has also built a great personal relationship. And going forward, I think that's the way we should go. We have, in fact, Cambodian student, there's about 300 Cambodian students graduating from Chinese university per year. That's a lot. And so I think going forward, we also have a lot of Chinese tourism coming to Cambodia. We reached at one point in time 2.5 Chinese tourists. That's how we try to encourage people to see, others from beyond the media headlines. Right? You see people truly for who they are. So I think this is very important, and I have a great friendship with you. So that's how we started it. And I think this is not something to be overlooked.
Thank you very much, Governor Shea. We all know that narratives by media can be misleading sometimes, and people-to-people understanding, nuanced understanding of each other is so important. Thank you for joining us on the Hub here on CGTN. I hope to talk to you again soon and see you again soon after COVID.
Thank you.
Serey. That was Serey Shea in Phnom Penh, Assistant Governor of the National Bank of Cambodia. We will take a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Hub. Victor, talking about China-ASEAN relations, President Xi said, and I quote, China will never seek hegemony, still less bully smaller countries during the summit. Do you think China has actually walked the walk, or is it just talk?
Well, I think China is talking the talk and walking the walk. Why? Because between China and ASEAN, they share many things together. There is a lot of historical exchange between China and many of the ASEAN countries. And in terms of culture exchange, people-to-people exchange, you name it. These two regions, I mean China versus ASEAN, are highly connected, and it will be increasingly interconnected. And China's approach to ASEAN as a whole and each of the 10 member states has always been treating everyone as an equal and respecting everyone fully on equal basis in terms of sovereignty, in terms of economic and financial principles, for example. And I think this is the solid foundation for China-ASEAN exchange and cooperation going forward. I don't think China wants to deviate from this at all. I think in dealing with China, each and every of the ASEAN member states should feel very comfortable that China is on equal terms with all of them.
Yeah, actually, this relationship goes way back. Dr. Hassan, what messages did you pick up from President Xi's address to the China-ASEAN anniversary dialogue mechanism speech?
Wang Guan, I think 30 years has demonstrated that relationship between China and ASEAN is based on trust. And mutual trust is very important, especially China as a superpower, ASEAN being a small country. And as mentioned by Assistant Governor Chia just now, let's take example BRI, for example. What you read from the media is something else, I guess. The media trying to portray BRI where China is trying to bully ASEAN nation. But again, as Governor Chia said, Cambodia has benefited a lot, Malaysia has benefited a lot, Indonesia has benefited a lot, especially on high technology. So I think the last 30 years, I think for the next 30 years, I think as President Xi said, is going to be very interesting relationship between China and ASEAN. Wang Guan.
Victor, I mean, let's face it, there has been a whole lot of power politics going on in this region, right? The UK is trying to include some of the ASEAN members to their upcoming G7 foreign ministers meeting. Joe Biden, the president of the US, held a virtual summit with ASEAN. What do you make of that?
Well, I think from the Chinese perspective, we should welcome the ASEAN countries as a whole and ASEAN as an organization have the full right to deal with and exchange with any other country in the world, any other blocks of the country in the world. And we hope these exchanges will be for peace and stability and development. However, if there are other countries which want to tie ASEAN or member states of ASEAN onto their bandwagon against China, that's another issue. We hope ASEAN will stand firmly for peace and development and growth, rather than being hijacked for the hostile agendas of several other countries in the world. Therefore, exchanges themselves should not be a problem if they are bent for peace and development and growth. And China should also very much enjoy our increasing exchanges with ASEAN countries because we work for peace and stability. We work for mutual benefit. I hope other countries, other parts of the world would do exactly as what China is doing with ASEAN countries.
Right, right. Dr. Hassan, how do you look at this? I mean, if you look at the Quad, the AUKUS, the US-led military or quasi-military alliances, where do ASEAN countries stand? Do they feel increasing pressure to pick and choose between the two great powers, namely China and the United States?
Yes, there are increasing pressure for ASEAN to choose a side, especially on the American side. When they form AUKUS, there are two sides of ASEAN regarding AUKUS. Some nations supported AUKUS, some nations such as Indonesia and Malaysia are very cautious. I concur with Victor said just now, ASEAN value development. ASEAN need both United States and China. And so far, Wang Guan, I think, ASEAN do not take sides. They are neutral. What they are saying right now is that they need both sides. And what Victor said just now demonstrate not only for the last few years, but for the last 30 years, Wang Guan.
Yeah, Victor, we know that some Western media suggest that China is strengthening ties with ASEAN out of convenience. But you know this better than many people, that this relations actually dates way back.
Absolutely. I would say China's relations with ASEAN is of convenience, of necessity, and also of mutual respect. Of course, it is very convenient because China and ASEAN countries are very close to each other. They are highly connected historically by culture, by many other measurements. But also, it's very, very necessary for both ASEAN countries and China to engage with each other. After all, ASEAN has been the largest trading partner for China in recent years, surpassing that of the United States and EU as a whole. And the prospect going forward is even brighter for the economic exchanges between China and ASEAN. On the other hand, ASEAN is complicated because if you look at the 10 ASEAN member states, they have different colonization history. They were carved out by different European countries. They were all occupied in the Second World War by Japan, imperialism, and then in the Second World War period, there were lots of other things happening to many of the ASEAN countries. I think the formation of ASEAN itself really brought ASEAN countries up independent on an equal footing with the rest of the world. And I think China respects ASEAN as an organization and ASEAN member states. And I would say this is more than exchange of convenience. It is of mutual respect of each other, mutual appreciation of each other's importance. For China, each of the ASEAN member states, big or small, is very important because we value them for their own sake and for their own purposes. And I would say this is also the roadmap going forward for how China would deal with each of the 10 ASEAN states, big or small, on an equal footing of full respect and mutual respect and mutual benefit.
You know, I'm interested in knowing our guest from Malaysia and really ask his take on this same question, Dr. Hassan. How do you, as a citizen of Malaysia and also a member of ASEAN, with Malaysia being a member of ASEAN, look at China's increasing role with ASEAN?
As Victor said just now, ASEAN is very, very complicated. But the good thing is that China, even though the media tend to give a different perception, China never forced ASEAN to take sides. Beijing never said or never forced ASEAN come with Beijing. Unlike Washington, sometimes they're trying to force ASEAN to be with Washington for Quad, for example, or AUKUS, for example. So as a Malaysian, and also as Malaysia as a country, I think we value, especially on China high technology investment in Malaysia. Currently, there are East Coast Rail in Malaysia, currently in development. I think it's a win-win situation. And I think Malaysia is the first country in ASEAN develop diplomatic relation with Beijing in 1971, one of the first. So I think that's we have our regards with China, and we are hoping a win-win relationship in the near future, Wang Guan.
Dr. Gao, 50 years ago, a very important meeting took place, the Bandung Conference. Many said that a Bandung spirit came out of the conference, meaning including political self-determination, non-interference. How do you see the connection of the Bandung spirit and today's China-ASEAN relations?
Well, first of all, from the Chinese perspective, the Bandung principle remains the cardinal principle of country-to-country relations. And I think China has always respected and fully practiced the Bandung principle, because non-interference in each other's internal affairs, full respect, fully respecting every other country's sovereignty and territorial integrity is the cornerstone of the international world order today, and should remain so for all the countries in the world, big and small. You mentioned the choice between China and the United States. I would say for ASEAN countries as well as for all the other countries in the world, the choice should not be between China versus the United States. The choice should be between peace, development and growth and friendship on the one hand versus rivalry, conflict, confrontation or war on the other hand. I think people in ASEAN have enough wisdom to choose the right path forward for peace and development and growth, rather than being hijacked by one country or one group of countries onto the very dangerous path of war and confrontation. I don't think other countries should underestimate the wisdom and the vision of the ASEAN countries and ASEAN people.
There has been certainly a whole lot of ideological dogma these days. Dr. Hassan, finally, talking about trade and investment between China and ASEAN, we have some exciting figures. In the past 30 years, China-ASEAN trade volume has grown, jumping from less than 8 billion to over 600 billion over the past 3 decades, as you see over there. Wow. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a very exciting figure, Wang Guan, 85 folds in 30 years. And China, I think, being a big superpower, Wang Guan, can take advantage of ASEAN, but it doesn't happen. It did not happen for the last 30 years. ASEAN is the biggest trade partner for China, and China is the biggest trade partner for ASEAN. It demonstrates that it's a win-win situation. And that's the reason, as Victor said just now, mutual respect is very important, non-interference is very important, and I think it'll be good for the future, not only for ASEAN, China, but for the Asia-Pacific region. Wang Guan.
Dr. Hassan and Dr. Gao, thank you both so very much. And that will do it for this edition of The Hub on CGTN. Thank you for watching. Get in touch with me on social media if you have any suggestions. Bye for now.